China has been threatening the peace and tranquility along the line of actual control in the Himalayan region. In the recent years, we have been witnessing a lot of provocations by the Chinese People Liberation Army troops all along the Himalaya region. This has been happening for a long time. So in this episode, we'll discuss in detail to sort of decipher the patterns that emanates from the Chinese behavior in the past almost a decade. The China watchers, those who are following the Chinese behavior, we could see the Chinese military aggression or sort of trying to change the status quo in the last 10 years. So what explains this Chinese behavior and why China is doing this and how to understand the Chinese the military strategy in the Himalayas. There are certain incidents that we can correlate, and there is a sort of a link with each of the events that has been happening in the last 10 years. We all know that India and China has signed an agreement in 1993 with the visit of the Prime Minister, the late P.V. Narasimha Rao, in a sort of agreement to build a confidence-building measures to maintain the peace and tranquility in the line of actual control. As part of the strategy, there are standard SOPs being put in place, and both parties have been since then following and observing those SOPs. Although there are some minor sort of transgressions or trespasses by the Chinese troops, given the nature of the line of actual control in the Himalayan region, especially the Ladakh sector, so this is sort of a mutually resolved at the tactical and the military level on the ground. But in 2013, we all got to know that there is a famous crisis happening in Depsong sector or in the south of Daulat Beg Odi, where the Chinese had built a sort of encampment with the more than 50 army soldiers. So the Indian army tried to challenge the presence, and then finally they were refused to move from that particular place. So it continued almost a month, and there were a lot of uproar happening in the parliament as well. The opposition started criticizing the then ruling party, the Congress government, that this is sort of the 1962 debacle that Congress is having with China on the LACs, or not able to handle the crisis. So as a sort of more than 20 days discussion and negotiation through the existing framework mechanism at the tactical and the border level, finally they reached a conclusion, and as a part of that agreement, that India has destroyed some structures, bunkers in the Chunar sector in the south of Daulat Beg Odi. Then the Chinese troop went back. So that's where they all started in 2013, and we should also it is important to understand, in 2013 Xi Jinping has become the president of the Chinese of People's Republic of China, and he has also introduced what you call the Belt and Road Initiative all along the Himalayas, including it cut across the Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So in 2014, when the NDA or the Prime Minister Modi got elected with a thumping majority, and the ruling BJP party, even during the poll, the agenda has mentioned that India is going to give a sort of a resolute response to the Chinese aggression, and the things will be totally different. So in 2014, we, as a sort of a bonhomie, that Xi Jinping visited India, and India and the Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, they had a series 2 days talk in Ahmedabad in Gujarat. So it sort of given an impression that there is a sort of a thaw in the relationship between both new leaders. Xi Jinping is also new as a president of PRC, and the Prime Minister is also new. So there was an expectation among the policy circles and strategy community that things going to be different, and both of them have agreed to take the relationship forward and also work together to find a solution to the border issues. And that hope has got sort of shattered when in the same year when the Chinese have docked the nuclear submarine in Colombo port, which is sort of a very close proximity to the India's southern states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala, where we have a strategic assets like nuclear plants, power plants, and the ports. So the Chinese behavior seems to be a sort of the provocation as well as sort of rapprochement at both levels. So again, the issue was not this has been the reactions and response from Indian side since 2013, that any such provocations happen by the PLA or the PLA Navy. India, the Indian, the military used to we used to have the military restraint on the ground, so that there is a space for the diplomatic and the political discussion with the Chinese counterparts to resolve the issues amicably. And this has been the pattern at that time. But in 2014, that we have learned that this is a sort of a strategy which has been popularly described as the Chinese salami slicing strategy. So what is it, Chinese, the so-called salami slicing strategy? Even the late Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, has also very vocal and about the Chinese salami slicing strategy in the Himalayas. The strategy actually means sort of a small threatening the enemy with the minor provocations in a continuous way, so that they will able to encroach or seize certain small size of space or the border areas. That will be difficult and illegal if they do it in at once. So the Salami strategy is also, sort of a conquering strategy that Chinese has been using it even way back in 1950s, and that's how they have taken the Tibet, and even the same strategy they have been using vis-a-vis Taiwan in South China Sea. So this is a new sort of trend, that when the Chinese docked a nuclear submarine in Colombo, so the salami slicing strategy need not to be in the Himalayas, on the landscape, on the borders, also it is on the maritime boundaries. So we've got a sort of the holistic understanding about these minor provocations happening in many ways, and India's strategies then till the 2014, that it is sort of a military restraint. Then subsequently in 2016, we had this BRICS summit in Goa, where the Xi Jinping again visited there, and there was a much high, expectations when China, India, and Russia had a trilateral meeting in the silence of the BRICS, and there was a hope that these border provocations needs to be stopped, and the peace and tranquility has to be maintained. And Indian side was very categorical that the 1993 agreement signed between the Government of India and the PRC should be respected in letter and spirit. But Xi Jinping and his the new the plan, the PLA, had a sort of a different sort of thing in their mind. It is also interesting to note in that summit, the India and China and Russia had signed a cooperative agreement, the oil and gas sharing agreement, for which that India can import the gas from China through Myanmar, and the same amount of gas will be given by the Russia to China with the existing pipeline, since India and China or India and Russia don't have a direct pipeline. So there was a sort of an interdependence. Energy interdependence was also praised by many experts. Soon after, within a year, in 2017, we all know that's a major provocation. In fact, you can say it is a military standoff in 2017 in Doklam, the tri-junction between India and Bhutan and China. So that is sort of an eye-opener for India's strategic, the policymakers and the establishment, security establishment, the Chinese, to really understand what exactly the Chinese provocations. And there our strategy has sort of changed. We also mobilized our troops, and there was an actual eyeball to eyeball military standoff, and the entire world was concerned about that it should not escalate to a full-fledged war. But the idea is that the Chinese PLA or nor the Xi Jinping seems to be not inclined to have a full-fledged war with India. The reason being is that India is not the India which was in 1962. It is a nuclear power state, and it is one of the fourth largest economy. And China's trade with India is has been growing, and we have a huge trade deficit with China as well. So for Chinese Chinese policymakers and the President Xi Jinping and the Liberation Army (PLA), the salami slicing strategy seems to be working very well, since we don't have until 2017 Doklam a more robust, effective response to Chinese salami slicing strategy. As I mentioned earlier in 2013, that how we responded to the that song crisis with sort of a military restraint on the ground level. But that has got changed for the first time in 2017 Doklam, and the Chinese were taken aback, and finally the Chinese were pulled back, and India did not yield on that. So thereafter the Chinese sort of added more proxy strategy, and that was very much visible in 2018 and in the 19 as well, when the Nepal has started raising issue against India on the borders, and the Kalapani issues, and the Chinese ambassador was very vehemently criticized by the Indian foreign policy, Indian diplomats and India's foreign secretary as well, for interfering in the bilateral affairs between India and Nepal. So these are all in the public domain, that how the China is desperate to continue their salami slicing strategy, not only in the Himalayan or the trans-Himalayan region, as well as in the extending the same strategy to the Indian Ocean by sort of threatening or encroaching into India's sphere of influence or India's strategic sphere. Again, we had 2019 the Chennai Connect, where Xi Jinping visited in Chennai in Tamil Nadu, and both part leaders had a series of discussion at multiple levels, and the border dispute was also discussed. At the same time, when they were meeting in Chennai, there was a minor provocations in LAC. So it seems that the PLA has its own policy, and with the support of the President Xi Jinping, and that continues the policy. At the same time, they continue to engage with India diplomatically and politically, and as part of the strategy, so that there will be a gradual sort of a seizing of the space and the border areas and territories, which seemingly they have been successful for ages, and the same strategy been doing it. Now, coming back to the question that we asked in the beginning, that why would China do this? And if you look at the Chinese pattern of doing this, this would help the Chinese President Xi Jinping to sort of tell the domestic audience that our borders are not peaceful, and we need to have the strength in the borders, and also to divert their domestic failures to their attention, the domestic audience attention, to the external aggressions, being it a Taiwan crisis or even the Trans-Himalayan crisis. And moreover, the Chinese establishment and the Xi Jinping administration also seems to be not happy with the way India had opposed the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and we have been criticizing the Xi Jinping's pet project, as it lacks transparency and also opaqueness, and also runs through the disputed territory that violates India's sovereignty. That has been the consistent effort that we have been doing it. So all along that in 2019 that India did a big major policy move by introducing the J&K Reorganization Act, that had sort of made the Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh into two union territories, which means directly under the administration of the government of India, the central government, and also sort of once again asserts the territorial integrity of the Jammu and Kashmir and their boundaries, including the LOC and the Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And there is a direct reference to Akshay Chain, which is falls on along the line of actual control. So this is sort of a big move. I would say it's a sort of a preemptive policy or India's strategy that India had asserted that it position on the territories. So then you had this corona in 2019, COVID-19, and finally during the COVID, the Chinese had provoked again in the Galwan Valley, and in that clash. We all know that the Chinese have mobilized the troops, and now the standoff still continues, and the talks happening on. And this is a sort of an ongoing, the salami slicing ongoing. But what is different? What makes it different is there is the India's response to the Chinese salami slicing strategy in the Trans-Himalayan region, being it, or also in the Indian Ocean region. For example, the recently the Chinese ship, which is Yuan Wang 5, which is a ballistic missile, which can track the ballistic missile and satellites. Tracking ship was docked in Hambantota, and India opposed it because that could expose India's strategic locations in the southern state and also the Andaman Nicobar Theatre Island, the Theatre Command. So despite that, the Sri Lankan has allowed it, and the ship was docked there for days. So this is all part of to deter the India's sphere of influence in the region, and also sort of violating the existing agreement between India and China to meet in the peace and tranquility on this. The last, which was happened in a month ago in the Arunachal Pradesh, Tawan sector in Yangtze, where the Chinese, few hundred Chinese soldiers, PLA soldiers, trying to dodge India's post, and India sort of fiercely resisted and reacted and pushed them back. And again, it came in the news. So the Chinese seems to be by doing all these provocations, they knew that the media also, how it picks up in Indian domestic media, and that creates a debate, and that is how they continue to. It's a sort of a psychological warfare that continue to feed the domestic discussion and debate, and keeps the China fear alive in the Indian strategic community and Indian policymakers. But I find that as a strategic student of strategic studies, and my analysis, that I find that now the response seems to be more robust and effective and proportionate from the Indian side. Although given the fact that we did not have more leverage vis-a-vis China, given the fact that the India-China trade has reached $136 billion recently, that is the highest ever, compared to 2021 $126 billion. And our trade deficit, for the first time, it has reached $100 billion. So, which means a huge money, that $100 billion that we are our export to China has gone down from $26 billion to $17 billion, and our exports have increased. This is the most important serious concern, that we need to make more policy corrections, particularly our economic policy corrections, to bridge this gap, the trade deficit which we have with the China, and what are the measures that we can take to address this particular gap. Although we are much more strong and robust in terms of military, and the Chinese is also very much aware of that, given the current crisis which is happening in the global level, and there is a huge sort of an isolation strategy by the West towards China on the Taiwan issue. And recently, the Japan has also come out with the historic transformational security and defense strategy that is also sending a signal to the Chinese. So all it combines to keeps the China sort of an isolating from the international community, so that that they would change the behavior. But we need to work more on the economic front, identify those areas where we can do some policy corrections that would bring the trade deficit down and reduce our export or import dependence on China. And that would be the more effective strategy that would actually pinch or hit the Chinese, although we have a strong the military and the robust military forces, and that Chinese know very well about that India's military preparedness vis-a-vis any sort of major provocations. If you ask me that will China initiate a war, 1962 war, similar sort of 1962 war in Himalayan region, I don't think so. The Chinese is capable of doing it as of now. They may be after these incidents like Doklam and the recent incidents. I give an example of the Nepal issue, in Nepal case, that how the Chinese trying to use Nepal against India, using as a proxy, a political proxy, and they have been trying to build an authoritarian regime in small states in South Asia or India's neighborhood. The last year, the Sri Lankan economic crisis and the political crisis, I think that is Chinese seems to be the frustrated that their strategy seems to be failing. Moreover, India needs to strengthen its deterrence capabilities vis-a-vis China to effectively deter the salami slicing strategy by China.